Hello, my name is Rosemary Feit Covey, and I'm at my exhibition at Morton Fine Art. The name of the exhibition is Descartes Died in the Snow. And I'm just going to tell you a few little interesting anecdotes about each of the pieces, or at least a few of the pieces in the exhibition. I'm not going to go into the really deepest, most personal parts of why each piece was important to me, because that's hard to do in a video like this. But I am going to tell you a few interesting facts about each piece. So this is the piece that represents the title of the show. It's called Descartes Died in the Snow. And I'm really fascinated by the range of his work and also the human being, Descartes. And so this piece kind of encompasses a number of elements of both his philosophy, his mathematics, and a visual then representation of it. So the piece is made so that it's attached with magnets in sections, so that underneath the part that actually has reference to Descartes is a whole other piece. You may never see the other piece. You may never take it apart in order to have it there. I have photographs of it, but it is there. So it's an abstraction. So this is a very dimensional piece. So why did I call it Descartes Died in the Snow? Well, Descartes was also a man, and he was invited to Sweden to teach the Queen his theories. And the two of them didn't really get along very well. Plus, their life rhythms were very incompatible. She liked to get up very, very early in the morning, and he liked to sleep till noon. So in his trying to work with her, he had to get up very early. Sweden was very, very cold, and he got pneumonia, and he died. And then, so in a sense, he did die in the snow. But it's the feel of it, the feel of the fact that he, as well as everything he did, he also had to make a living, and this patronage was important. In this piece called Broken Earth, I used woodcut and coffee grounds and string. And the piece is very dimensional, which doesn't show when you see a flat version of it. But it's based on my horror and my worry about the nature of water in our world. Because water is a commodity that we tend to use freely. But in my native South Africa, where I grew up, if you remember a few years ago, there was a huge water shortage. And it's so easy as news cycles work in this world that a crisis such as occurred in South Africa with the drought is on the news for a few days, and then we move on to something else. But the precious nature of water and its diminishment is going to be a long-term problem that we deal with. So this broken earth was motivated by what I saw happening in South Africa, and the images of people of every walk of life, every color, all in lines, desperate to get a few drops of water. And even a few years later, visiting South Africa, there were restrictions and notices everywhere you went on preserving water. And the population kind of came together to do this, and the catastrophe was averted. But these are issues that are of great importance long term. This piece, Panspermia, is based on my work with scientists, and particularly in this case on the subject of lichens. I've done a number of pieces on fungus and lichens and mushrooms, but panspermia is a theory that's been around for some time that that plant matter might have traveled through space and actually formed a basis for life in the universe. The theory has been discredited and then re-emerged, and I'm not a scientist, so it's just a loose background to the piece, but the theory recently began to be re-examined because lichens were sent into outer space and were floating around, and they actually didn't die. They're such a complex, strong biological entities that they didn't die, and so it brought the theory up again. But I am interested in it as a very visual type of element. So this piece is very abstract. I think, to me, it both looks like it's outer space, but it could also be the lights of a city as you fly over the city. I like pieces that are open to interpretation. So I can always say the panspermia theory was a jumping off point, but really the piece has a life of its own as a piece of artwork. I wanted to talk about this piece in the exhibition because it encompasses so many elements of my work from the past. It's an engraving, so it's made out of wood engravings, but they are attached to magnets to create the dimension, which means that the story that this piece tells can be adjusted and retold. And this is part of a new series I'm working on for the future, which is on the unreliable narrator. So I love books with unreliable narrators, but I love the idea that the story can change its meaning within the picture. So this piece was based on a black folktale that I could only find in one place. I never could find the source. I could never find anything further about it except for the original, just rough telling of it just on a rough search through the computer. But the story itself is very beautiful to me and meaningful. It came from South Carolina, and it's the story of a young woman who is working as a housekeeper. And through the window, as she's working in the house, she hears in a graveyard nearby some beautiful music and singing. And so she is drawn to it, and she crosses the road and goes through a field towards the graveyard. And as she does so, it starts to rain heavily, but the music is totally beautiful. And she is drawn into singing with this choir that she finds in the graveyard. And a man emerges from the crowd, and he hands her a black umbrella. And he says, "Your voice is so beautiful, it shouldn't be exposed to the rain." And so she takes the umbrella, and she's so moved in her singing that she closes her eyes. And when she opens them again, all the people in the choir have disappeared, and she's alone there. So she takes the black umbrella, and she walks back to the house. And the woman that she's working for says her name, and says, "You have forgotten your umbrella." And she picks it up, and she walks out the front door and down the path, and she keeps walking. She doesn't go back. And to me, this is the story of an artist, and what happens as you are encouraged in your life, like the figure of the man. To me, I've made other pictures in the series, and I make him slightly malevolent because he's giving her the praise, but he's also, in my mind at least, more like somebody who would be managing her career. And I mean, he's also a ghost. So there's many parts to this. And it's such a simple story, but it's so open then to interpretation. So to me, she found her voice. He encouraged her, which gave her courage, and then she walked out on her own. And so I wanted to do this whole piece and more pieces as a tribute to the gospel singers, the women gospel singers of the 30s, There were so many of them, and many of them forged very unusual careers that have, they're always the famous ones, but there were a lot of them that were less famous. And so I'm hoping to move forward maybe in the future with this story. But the piece has dimension and movement, and does have my engraving, and but also the meaning of the story was really personal to me. One of the most extraordinary places I've ever been in my life was the North Pole. I went up through Norway, through Svalbard, and then up further. And when I went on this trip, one of the things that I was really excited to see was polar bears. And I had an image from travel folders of polar bears, kind of close up, a white polar bear with a cub, very clean. But the reality, as in so many things in life, was so much more extraordinary, because in the North Pole area, what you see is not like a travel folder. You see a vastness, like an incredible vastness that goes as far as the eye can see, of the ice floe pieces, huge areas like I have here of dark water, and then maybe somewhere in the midst of all this hugeness and vastness, you'll see this lone polar bear in the distance. And it's so emotional because as the scientists told me on the trip, I asked about global warming, and that, they said, in this particular area was not affecting the polar bears. But what was affecting their lifespan was the difficulty of just polar bear life, because finding seals and living in such a harsh terrain was something that not every polar bear caught on to. And so many of them died just from starvation, from not being able to find a seal to eat. And the sadness of the reality and seeing it with this dark sky and the dark water. And then, if you come to this section, it's flowing into a very dark vastness. And this piece is made from woodcuts, and it's also made from plastics, which are such a problem in the world in the water. So I used found plastic, and old grocery bags, styrofoam, woodcuts, and paint to make the dimensional feeling of the flow.